Our next speaker is Ken Jackson, Professor and Chair of the English Department.
Thank you. Make sure you use the cards.
I will.
Keep me on target. Thank you for staying this late. I want to begin with one respectful civil disagreement with our keynote speaker, she was really an academic capacity, Professor Herbst, when she made the distinction between civility and other forms of human activity, say courtesy, politeness, manners. I think those things blur together in some complicated way, particularly in the context she was discussing, which is K-12 education and undergraduates. And I think those things are very difficult to discuss, they're very difficult to define, and very difficult to tease out, but nonetheless we need to try to do so, and that's part of my presentation today, which involves a return to, this book may be very familiar to some, completely new to others, Norbert, Elias, The Civilizing Process. And in some ways I just want to put this up here because in the modern media craziness, it seems lots of people think the only sociologist who ever lived or ever was Charles Murray. We live in very strange times. So for none other reason, I put Elias up here. The book had an unusual publication history and an unusual history of academic reception. That is, it was published, as you see, in 1939, hit war times, came back in translation in 1969, right in a moment when the Weberian kind of ideas or structures that Elias was working in were very unpopular, and that was complicated by the fact that Elias was making an argument about how history and society function top-down. And lots of critics, political critics particularly at the time, were very agitated and nervous by the fact that when one talks about such processes, that one is also advocating for them rather than just critiquing or looking at them. So very quickly, let me review Elias. What Elias argues is our manners, our courtesy, our civility originate in the need for European aristocracy to distinguish itself from lower or middling classes. In short, at one time, social structures were divided by who was the best warrior. As society got more complicated, the aristocracy needed different ways to distinguish themselves, and they came up with a whole system, a way of behaving, dressing, talking differently, eating differently, and we'll talk about toileting differently, sleeping differently, and that's where our manners came from, and those manners were most refined, of course, around the court. Hence our term, courtesy. So that is to say, all our manners, even today, our polite way of being derived from a vertical, top-down, hierarchical structure. And to the extent I have a thesis or argument today, it's simply this, is that part of our difficulty of dealing with issues like civility in America is how do you live in America, which is borrowed this vertical structure, when the rest of our ideas are supposed to be horizontal in some way. And in short, this is a historical problem that we've never come to terms with. One of our bad habits of mind of late is we refer to history and we point out history in parts of our everyday arguments to say, oh, this has happened before, which is true, and then we leave it at that, as if that has some explanation, as if our understanding of history can't alter things in some way. And I think, again, to the extent I want to make claims here, I want to make the claim that looking back at Elias's argument and considering its truth, and then accepting at least its persuasive power, if not its truth, to what way can we intervene and understand that we're living in the wake of this history, which is causing us lots and lots of problems, as many of them have been addressed today. Okay, so again, quickly on the civilizing process tutorials, you know what I'm talking about. Something as basic as the handshake. You know what I mean when I extend my hand to Brad. Brad doesn't have to shake it. We don't have soap or anything like that. But we all know pretty much in the room where the handshake came from. At least we know nominally where it came from, correct? Why do we use the handshake as a gesture? No one shows the open gesture. So behind all our manners, all our courtesy, all our gestures of civility is this hidden violence, which is also what we've been talking about here. Between Brad, I agree with him completely on this, the stakes, the seriousness of what's going on today in terms of our trying to negotiate between civility and incivility. The handshake, of course, is just one familiar and naturalized, normalized gesture that we've come to kind of accept. But there are plenty of others, Elias would have argued. One would be that our very eating habits, that no one ever used knives and fork, and there was no particular reason to use knives and fork until the aristocracy started using knives and forks because it set them apart from everyone else, and everyone else started imitating them. The knife, of course, was a very threatening weapon to have at the table, hence the fork. It kind of took the sting out of things a little bit. Our sleeping habits, right? We tend to sleep alone or sleep with someone we like, or sleep with someone we're comfortable with. Most of us come to prefer to sleep alone at some point. Where did that come from? Well, in the medieval court and into the early modern court, sleeping alone, having your own room, was a sign of distinction. It was a sign of social distinction. It was one way that you were marked apart from those below you. But again, as people started to look at those habits, started to adopt them because they wanted to move up the social ladder, those things became normalized and naturalized. Same thing with our toileting habits, right? It's quite natural for us to want some degree of privacy when we're in the privy. That wasn't, of course, always the case. It would have been completely normal for a monarch to take care of business in front of any number of servants or people beneath them. In fact, that was one way of signaling, again, his superiority in the social status. Those things come down to us today. I mean, I don't think it's apocryphal. Someone probably knows the history better, but at least I think it's in the Carol biographies. LBJ was famous for inviting people in when he was on the can to make sure they knew who was boss when they were talking to LBJ. Again, whether that's true or not, leave up to the historians. But again, it's a remnant of this. Okay, thank you. Yeah. It's a remnant of this medieval, early modern court history, which again we're still living with. Again, in a nutshell, all our manners, all our civility involve masking or managing basic biological impulses, what Elizabeth might refer to as affective feelings or powers or things like that. We manage aggression via the handshake. We manage the aggression with our academic colleagues by saying, that's interesting, rather than we manage our fear in all sorts of ways. We manage our fatigue. Our students, lots of you people sitting here are completely fatigued and exhausted and tired, but you're still making a good show of things. You're sitting upright, you're making eye contact, you're doing all the good things to show me that no matter what you're feeling, you're still a very civil, polite audience. And again, they're conflating these two sort of important in important terms. Our bowel functions, etc. Why when we sit down, the food is brought to the table. Why do we wait? We no longer fart at ease at the table, at least in sort of polite company. That again never used to be the case. But all of these things came to be naturalized or normalized so that we could not only function in what was called a civilized world or a vertical world, but we could move up. These were things you had to learn. Okay? You had to learn, and then you had to learn how to control what you were feeling, whether in your gut or in your head or your emotions. And then you had to act out the proper mannerisms to get by. And if you didn't learn that, you were in trouble. Okay? And again, we all learn to do these by watching, controlling, and then imitating usually those above us. And this is one of the things that everyone is naturally terrified about, I think, at the moment, given the current state of Washington, D.C., which is to say, if this is what's at the top of the social pyramid that everyone is in some way watching, imitating, and looking at, we have substantial, serious problems there. Okay, so again, this stuff is not hard. I mean, Elias, I'm giving you a thumbnail version of Elias in his argument, which is his historicism is pretty impressive. But again, this is historicism that one can take easily in if you've ever been to junior high or middle school, at least in an American system, or frankly, if you've ever had the first day of a job, which is to say, in junior high, one of the first things you learn to do is figure out who's at the top of the social pyramid and imitate their manners, fashions. What are they wearing? What are they doing? How are they acting? We all like to think we pass through those kind of processes when we get to be an adult, but of course we don't. Whatever job, culture we move into that first day, if you have any sense whatsoever, you shut your mouth, you open your eyes, and you watch, and then you pay attention to the people that you want to be, etc., etc. This is, again, at the heart of Elias, and this is the system of manners or courtesy that has been passed down to us, and it has informed our civility. Why do I like talking about this stuff? Well, it's perfectly well registered in literature. I'm an English professor. I can't give you about 45 seconds of literature here. You all remember I put these particular texts up here because I'm assuming everyone had some form of the English survey. So you remember our good friend Beowulf, right? Not exactly the most mannerly guy in the world. But we don't know, I always tell my students, we don't know what Beowulf looked like, right? We imagine him as Conan the Barbarian, Arnold Schwarzenegger, but nowhere in the manuscript text of Beowulf, this very long thing, he's an epic hero, we have no idea what he looks like. None whatsoever. No physical description except that he's powerful. One good reason for that, of course, is it didn't matter a hill of beans what Beowulf looked like. It mattered that Beowulf could achieve his social ascendancy via his physical prowess, right? We move forward a couple hundred years, we move on to an author like Chaucer, right? And all of a sudden with Chaucer, where the world has changed, and how we dress, how we talk, how we smell, right? How we move is becoming that much more important. All of a sudden, Chaucer puts a microscope on society. So in Chaucer's fiction, we start to see the miller's nose. Not only do we see the miller's nose, we see the hair on the miller's nose, right? We're looking as close as we can, and we start to see this intense sort of self-consciousness develop. This self-consciousness which is necessary in growing and developing, because in order to enact our manners, we need a tremendous amount of self-control, biological self-control. And again, I'm referring back to our latest president, Obama, and the sort of masterful sort of performance he put on under all sorts of circumstances, all sorts of stresses, was able to put on a mask. An extraordinary mask, an extraordinary performance to hide and mask any aggression or resentment and sorts of things like this. The big example, probably the less well-known example, is probably the West, I would argue, the West's most influential book, and by the way, that's coming from a guy who does religion, and so the Bible and Shakespeare. I would say in the West, and particularly in Western political discourse, the most important book is Balthasar Castiglione's The Courtier, which was a conduct manual which taught courtiers how to behave, how to succeed at court. This was a self-help manual, a DIY manual before the time. It had its own elongated publishing history, but it was read by everyone who was anyone, and it was read with that attention that you read things when you actually need to do something and it's important to you. And what Castiglione talked about a lot was achieving a heightened sense of manners and courtliness to the point where you could develop, and everyone, I hope people know this word, sprezzatura, right? The Italian, great sort of old Italian word, sprezzatura, is the art of making the difficult look easy. In modern parlance, we might call it style or grace. It's that peculiar quality which we reserve for the top of the top. And again, go back to President Obama, right? Who was renowned for not only pulling off this mask or veil. I mean, you could say Nixon did that. Nixon always looked civil, but the sweat was pouring down, looked miserable sort of doing it, still is on pictures today. Whereas Obama did it and he made it look easy, when we know, of course, it wasn't easy at all. Okay? It took an extraordinary amount of self-control. One last literary example, and then Henry James' American, this is the American, one of James's early novels, not read anymore, it should be. This is a great clash, sort of pre-war, where the American character, Christopher Newman, does his world tour. He's made a ton of money, and he goes over to Europe when you still have remnants of the European aristocracy, that system very much in place, the court system very much in place before the war, and Newman, this American who wants to find a wife, amongst other things, and he wants to be cultured and he wants to be an American aristocrat of sorts, is confronted by particularly the French, who look at them and say, why are you smiling so much, right? Why do you make these big, strong gestures? Why do you talk so loud? In short, why haven't you learned our European system of manners, which is this tight, controlled, affective management, right, that has come to constitute, in many ways, what lots of us call, or want to, when we think of civility, particularly kids in K-12, they can't distinguish between our whole system of post-enlightenment, legal structures, rules, protocols, sort of things like that, or academic argumentation or something like that. They blur those things together. So what is civil is a controlled, managed, elegant, graceful front. So again, that's the courtier. So what am I arguing, or what am I suggesting, or what do I want to talk about? One thing is, I've always thought, is in America, we need a wholesale reinvention of what we mean by civility. People brought up, it's really hard to define. There have been some very good definitions of it, and it's kind of like obscenity, we know it when we see it. But for what is supposedly an egalitarian democratic society, we need a whole different system of manners, courtesy, and civility, which is aligned with that, rather than trying to pursue this vertical one, which always puts us into difficult power relations, which is to say, there's always someone on top that you're imitating, right? What would this look like? Again, borrowing a lot from Elizabeth, I don't know. I don't have any answers. But I just think referring to this history is incredibly necessary, particularly right now. We talked, Professor Herbst talks about 1850s, that moment of American civility, and then where that led to the 1860s. Well, the moment before the 1850s, and frankly, probably the moment that produced the 1850s was that turn from the revolutionary court structure of the Founding Fathers to Jacksonian democracy, which reshaped America, and then that whole generation led us into the 1850s, I would sort of argue. And we're in another kind of one of those moments right now with Trumpism, which is this enormous reaction to a kind of civility, or a vertical structured civility that can't be mirrored, or can't be easily mirrored or imitated. That's amplified by social media, but how that happens, I'm not exactly sure. But again, what I would press for, and what I would ask us to discuss more openly, is this long history, and to try to discover a means of civil discourse that didn't involve this vertical process of integration. That, to me, is what is most pressing. Thanks. Maybe I'll prompt the question. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jackson. If we're gonna reinvent civility on a wholesale scale, I guess it'd be a whole different thing, wouldn't it? It'd be a whole different word, right?
You know, that's what we're doing. Yeah, and I don't mean to full out. And by the way, when it comes to push comes to shove, I'm with Brad's position on this, and sort of, Professor Wall's position on this, you know, more or less. But nonetheless, I think in our imaginative capacity, we can't ignore this kind of history because we keep getting trapped in the same it's almost mathematical formula traps where you're looking up, you're imitating, you're getting irritated because you can't pull it off. And again, I think there is, I don't mean to, I sound like, you know, George Will in The American Fabric or something like, you know, there's something in the American culture which resists, right? That kind of
something in language that exists.
Exactly, it sort of resists.
How do we escape the historical context of the creation?
Yeah, yeah, well, how do you escape that? You know, this is why partly this screaming about elites and things like this, yes.
I think also, I wonder also in terms of not only the vertical, but in terms of dominance also in terms of what is civil and what's not civil.
Yeah.
So that first day of junior high, first day on the job, if you're not, if you're African American male, African American female, or Latino male, I mean, it's something that you're not a white male.
Yeah.
There's certain norms and behaviors you have to automatically do, or you will not survive in that environment. And I think about being civil, what that means for communities that are, you know, raising their children in terms of you behave one way in middle school, one way in the community, and it kind of stress that I think about the 1960s when African Americans went through this whole phase of big afros, different clothes, a different way of talking, a different way of being, and I think that to the civil, it was a great deal of stress on those people who are on the outside, in terms of what is it. And I agree. I don't know what civil is, but we know when we see it.
Or now, you know, again, the European structure, in some ways it was easier because you had one court structure, which usually didn't look that different across England, Spain, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But now we're broken up into different little social pyramids where so many people are having to learn different performances.
And also on job, outside the academy, if you go to AT&T or General Motors, different jobs, and look at who's been written up, a lot of the conflict is over people misunderstanding how people are behaving or talking.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the issue too in terms of this kind of idea of, we have these, I think, power arrangements also that I can power, but these different arrangements that people have to abide to.
Yeah. Well, again, it's no surprise too, like a lot of sort of Elias critics were sympathetic to him rather than harsh. Pointed out, you know, the pinnacle of this was the end of the 19th century when you had all the modern pressures swirling, but you still had a European court structure, more or less, for social hierarchy. And it's no surprise that, you know, Freudian psychoanalyst, it came at that moment where, this anxiety of having to constantly perform or act in different areas all the time, when there certainly was one dominant group, and it was increasingly harder for anyone, and in Freud's case it was all female patients, right? How do you manage this? How do you manage this when you are not the one at the top of the social pyramid setting the terms or setting the boundaries for what civility would be? So, no, I agree.
So I understand that there may be some tension between the CP, civilizing process of the vertical process, and the horizontal process that Professor Roth points out, that who is included in civil society are ones, or at least in conversation, are ones who recognize equal concern and respect of others. But can we understand civility as a concept or an idea that's subject to moral progress? So when we talk about civil society in the 1600s, for Locke, for example, civil society is an idea or a society that's in contrast with state of nature, right? So you get out of state of nature, which is lawlessness, and you form a society where you bind yourself to certain kinds of rules. And so if we think about civil society that way, people are trying to understand how they can distance themselves and their system of cooperation from the state of nature. So the more rule following you have at the upper echelon of society, you are distancing yourself from that lowly state of nature that others live in. But throughout history, we make this moral discovery that no, there is no such thing as this moral hierarchy where some people are morally superior, morally worthy because they follow rules. But in fact, people have equal moral status. And it's those who recognize that equal moral status are the ones who are deserving of place in this conversation, right? So can we think about civility as, there is a norm, prescription about what civility is, and that as a society we are in a process of discovery as to what that is, and we are closer to the criteria of civility than we were in the 1600s.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful. I mean, as demographically, as a classically angry white male hetero guy who had to learn, by watching and looking all sorts of different ways to function, right? The idea of prescriptive rules, right, a protocol in particular situations is appealing to me, rather than our cloaked, or what it can be perceived to be, a cloaked, hierarchical system. And I guess part of that's what I'm aiming at. Again, I don't have answers, but what I was asked to imagine is a more formal, widespread, set of protocols and discipline. I like that. Again, that's just sort of, who cares what I like? That's what I would prefer. Because if I can read, if you show me what the code and rules is, and then I can abide by that, and then we can find some sort of common way of interacting, that's better than a verb. Much.